Welcome to the Social Workers radio talk show on WCDB Albany 90.9 FM with co-host Dr. Eric Hardiman and Alyssa Lotmore. Here at the Social Workers, we address issues important to our communities with social work students, alumni, and community partners as our guests.
As part of the University at Albany School of Social Welfare, we hope to take social work beyond the classroom and agency settings and directly to the public, because the public is the client. Catch us on air, online, and anytime.
You are listening to WCDB Albany. This is the Social Workers live radio talk show. My name is Eric Hardiman, and I'm your co-host here with Alyssa Lotmore. Welcome back, Alyssa.
Hey, Eric, it's great to be here, and we're with an alum today, so it's always more exciting to have someone who graduated, I think the same time as me, a class of 2008 alum from the School of Social Welfare. So we'll have a really great show today.
It is great. It's, one of the many nice things about doing this show on the air here at WCDB is that we get to check in with alumni and find out what they've been up to, what they've been doing, social workers who are out in the community, maybe practicing as social workers, maybe not practicing as social workers, but certainly thinking as social workers and being social workers in the community. So today's a really good example, but it's always really nice to hear what you Albany graduates, and particularly graduates of the School of Social Welfare, are up to. So I'm excited about this conversation.
Yeah, that's the one thing I really do enjoy about our show, because it's connected to the university and the Albany, our capital region community. For the most part, we do have guests who are not local anymore, or maybe not alums, but it's different from other shows and podcasts, I feel, because it does have that connection where people can say, hey, that's an alum. Can I just reach out to them because we have a connection? Or that's somebody in our community. This is a resource that we can use and share. So I really enjoy that. And that's one of the reasons that I'm excited for this upcoming season, which is, I believe, our 11th, right?
I think so, yeah.
Because it's really a way that people are sharing and connecting with the UAlbany community and also the Capital Region community.
And if you're just tuning in for the first time and you've never heard our show before, we have The Social Workers is the name of the show. And the show is not intended just for social workers. It's called The Social Workers, but it's really about the community, and it's about what social workers do. It's about topics that relate to social work, but that also go beyond social work. And so it's our intent to really kind of think broadly and have a range of guests that talk about a range of topics that are important to the local and even national community in some instances. And today's topic, I think, is really important because some of the things we'll be talking about will be addictions, the legal system, the prison system, and we've got a whole bunch of topics today that certainly apply locally, but also apply nationally into other communities. And I'm excited about it. But our show broadcasts on Thursdays from 10 a.m. to noon, The Social Workers. You can also find us on a number of online resources as well and listen to it as a podcast after the fact. And so we're excited about The Social Workers.
Yeah. So with that, let's introduce our first guest of the season.
Great. Our first guest live with us here today is Lynn Rothenberg. Lynn graduated with her master's in social work from the University at Albany in 2008. She also has a background as a professional journalism and has prior professional writing experience too. She has completed a book-length manuscript that she will be submitting for publication soon. The manuscript addresses her experiences as a mother of a child battling addiction and its various consequences. Lynn, welcome to the Social Workers. We're excited to have you here today.
Thank you so much. I'm thrilled and honored to be here.
So Lynn, let's just start off with, you are a 2008 alum, MSW, so am I. So welcome to the show. Welcome back to UAlbany in a sense. Let's start off with a little bit about what inspired you to come back to school to get your social work degree to begin with.
Yeah.
I would say One of the articles I had written for a magazine was about psychiatry, and it took me a really long time to write it. It was a very in-depth article. And as I was writing it, I was thinking, well, I want to do this. Why am I just writing about this interesting topic? So I did some investigating, and obviously I was not going to become a psychiatrist, but I found out social work was the key to becoming a therapist. So that's what led me to SUNY in 2006. Well, actually, I made the decision, and I wanted to start immediately. So I started that summer. I applied, I got in, and I started the summer of 2006.
And that was after leaving a career in journalism, correct? You were a journalist before, or a
Yes.
reporter?
Yes, I was. Yes. And the most appealing thing about graduate school was writing all the papers, which I know other people hated. And it was my favorite part.
Interesting. So what was that transition like for you, going to, from being a professional writer to a profession that certainly involves writing, but is more about the practice of social work?
Well, I would say it was a smooth transition. I was really ready for it. I was tired of trying to earn my living as a writer, and I was excited. I was building a career for myself, a profession, and one that I felt very passionate about. And I just went in wholeheartedly, and it was, I loved it. I loved every aspect of it, even though I did my fair share of complaining about all the reading. So my weekends and nights were taken up with reading and writing papers, but I really loved it.
Great. It's
And
good
here
to
you
hear
are.
that.
Yeah. And here you are writing again, probably a book that you
Yes.
never really thought you'd be writing.
Never.
So tell us a little bit about your new completed manuscript and the reason for you writing it.
Okay. Well, this is not a book that I sat down to write. I never knew I would have this material.
Mm.
I often thought maybe someday I'll write a book, but I had no ideas. I knew nothing to write about. And then something happened in my life that gave me a lot of material. And basically the background is my son had a history of drug abuse, beginning with marijuana. And then he went to prescription painkillers. And then ultimately he ended up using heroin. And he developed quite a voracious heroin habit. And to support it, he committed burglary. He was arrested, and he ultimately did go to prison. Mm. And this was such a dramatic and traumatic event in his life and mine that I found, I couldn't sleep at night, and I couldn't stop thinking about it as we were going through it. I'm speaking specifically once he was arrested. Okay. Excuse me. So I thought, well, maybe if I write about it, my mind will stop worrying all the time. So I thought, I'm just going to write it and tell the story. But I thought, when it's completed, and completed is sort of not even the right word, because I didn't know how it was going to end. I didn't know what was going to happen next. He had just been arrested. It was a horrible time. But I thought, if I start writing about it, it'll stop going in my mind. And maybe one day I'll have a story. I'll go to Staples. I'll print it out. I'll hand it to my son, and I'll say, read this, in case you ever consider going down this path again, which of course was a silly notion, but I never dreamed I'd be writing a book that I would be one day submitting to agents.
Wow. Well, congratulations on finishing it. I know, the completion of a book-length manuscript is not an easy thing to do. And I'm sure, I would imagine that has taken you to some interesting places. Can we, so telling us this story, and particularly for listeners who are intrigued by your story and who, may have family members themselves battling addictions, can you talk a little bit about how this started out for you in terms of becoming aware of his addiction, and sort of what your relationship to that knowledge and to his addiction, how that developed for you?
And I'm going to interject a little first too, because Lynn, you're a social worker and you're a
Yeah.
parent. So I'd love for you, as you're answering that question that Eric just threw out, to sort of think about that and maybe give an answer as to, because there's two different answers, that emotional aspect of as a mom, and then as a social worker who is so familiar in this field of addictions, how that played a role.
Yes, well, that's kind of a key, I would say, theme in the book. And it's interesting because there was a parallel path that my son and I followed, where we were both going through the experience of his addiction, in different ways. And it's funny in a way, it's amusing that one of my favorite courses at SUNY was it was called ego psychology. And we learned about defense mechanisms. And I even did a presentation. One of my oral presentations was on defense mechanisms. And I knew them. I got an A. I knew all about denial and justifying and rationalizing. And I knew it all until I experienced it. And I experienced the power of unconscious defense mechanisms, and specifically denial, because this is what really became the biggest obstacle to my understanding of what was going on in front of me. And I would say that in the beginning, when he first started, it was marijuana. I knew it was a problem, and then it got onto pills. I knew it was a more serious problem. I never thought about addiction. That was not something that even entered my head. When one of his drug counselors mentioned it, I thought, come on, you look who you're talking about. This is my son. He's not addicted. He's using marijuana. He's okay. He's taking pills, and things were pretty much under control in terms of my life. It hadn't affected me, other than I was terribly worried. But I wasn't a social worker at that time. I knew nothing about substance abuse, which I guess is now called substance use disorder. I knew nothing about it. And certainly I knew nothing about addiction, other than that it definitely did not apply to my son. And then as time went on, it was actually when I was at SUNY, in my second year, my life started becoming affected by his use. And his life had become chaotic, and my life was becoming chaotic. And he was telling me stories, and I would believe his stories, and then everything would crash down. And all this while I'm trying to get my master's degree. And we know how demanding, Alyssa, how demanding the program was. And I was also dealing with my son's chaos and my confusion about what exactly was going on, trying to stop it. And I'll just jump ahead to after I graduated. My first job was at a substance abuse addiction agency. So up until then, I really knew very little about addiction, very little. And I wasn't looking for that job. The director of an agency called me. He said that someone from another agency had forwarded my resume to him. And he said, we have an opening. How would you feel about working with this population? Because some people, they don't really like it and they don't want to get into it. And quite frankly, I really did not want to work there, but I wanted a job. So I said, oh, I would love to. I have no problems with it. I'd really like to. So I was hired and I started working there. And it became interesting because I was treating clients who really had the same diagnosis as my son, but I did not see it. I refused to see it. And this is where denial came in, because I felt he really isn't like they are. He really doesn't have the same problem. He was using drugs and it's been disastrous, but he's just about to turn this corner because I'm helping him. And I mean, it was just, looking back, it was, a bit comical. how blinded I was. I was completely blinded. And, I was sending clients to rehabs, and my son was going to rehabs too. But I still did not think it was the same. I saw it as different.
Well, it's interesting, colloquially, when we talk about denial, a lot of folks think about denial as being, primarily for the individual who's going through something, that person is in denial about their addiction or about, whatever life experience they're going through in that moment. But I think your story really opens up that notion that denial as a concept, as a construct, is something that other people who, parents, siblings, partners, husbands, wives, they're, other people also experience that in relationship to what someone's going through. How did you get through that? How did you break through the denial and sort of an awareness of your own position in it?
Well, I broke through it quite dramatically. You're right about it. What happens is people get annoyed when you say that's not true. And people tried to tell me. They would say, and one counselor said to me, your son is a serious addict. And I didn't say it, but my first thought was, he is not. How dare you use the word serious? He's not a serious addict. By then I was starting to think, well, maybe he is addicted. But I broke through the wall of denial. It was my clients who helped me. They had no idea of my situation. I didn't disclose it. But at this point, this was 2009, I would say, 2009. He had already been through many rehabs. I had things were disastrous in my life. My son was, I didn't know what he was doing. I was giving him money. Because I kept, and that's another whole topic, of how, in your desperation to save your child's life, you feel you need to give them the support to get them on the right path. And so I kept doing that. And one day I ran a men's group Monday through Friday. And these men in my group I knew really well by now. It was a great group. And one morning I drew a timeline on the board, and I told them I was fabricating this timeline. I wanted to see how they would react to it. And the timeline was my son's timeline. And it documented, rehab, car crash, money problems, car crash, rehab, relapse, and, going on down this whole thing.
Yeah.
And I finished, and I turned around, and one young man in the group, exactly my son's age, his face was he was stunned. And he said, "That's my timeline. That's my life you just put up there." And he started talking about his life and how he lied to his mother. And he said, "I lied to her. How could I do that?" And I would tell her I needed money for this or that. And she didn't want to give it to me because she thought I'd buy drugs with it. And I'd lie, and I would get fake receipts and show her I really used it for what you said. And how could I lie about that? And as he was talking, I guess I was ready to hear it, because things were so bad in my life and in my son's life. I thought, oh my God, I'm that mother. That's who I am. He's talking about me. And I just, after group, I was so panicked. I suddenly realized there was nothing I could do to save my son. But I had to save myself, because this was destroying me. This was very, very damaging to me, health-wise. And I'd lost weight. I couldn't sleep. It was a disaster. And I ran downstairs, went up to one of the counselors, and I said, and I was very private about this. No one at the agency knew. One friend kind of knew I had a son who may have a drug problem. I kept it. No one, in fact, my friends didn't know. No one knew. And I ran downstairs and I said, listen, I'm just wondering if let's just say your son or someone you knew was using drugs, was using heroin, who would you send them to? And she said, she looked at me, I'm sure she knew. And she said, and she gave me the name of the therapist in Albany. And I ran upstairs and I wrote to him. And I started seeing him. And I would say the denial was gone by then. And he was excellent. And in one of my sessions with him, he said to me one day, I think he thought I wasn't hopeless, but I was a tough customer because I had reasons, I had reasons for why this and that happened and why I was justified in helping him this time and all of that. And he looked at me and he said, I remember he was holding a cup of coffee. It was such a powerful moment. He said, the more you help your son, the faster will he find his death. And I thought, it just stunned me. And I understood. And I cut him off. Not emotionally, I cut him off financially. I didn't give him any more money. And without money, if you're a heroin addict and you run out of your funds, you have to do something. You don't want to go through withdrawal. And he did what many do, and he stole. He committed burglary.
And that opened a new chapter for you, which was very emotional and a roller coaster of navigating the court systems, the prison systems. If you feel okay, would you like to talk a little bit about that?
Of course. Yeah, I mean, what I learned, this whole experience was, I learned so much about myself and how innocent, and not just innocent, but naive I was. And he was arrested, and the lawyer learned about his substance abuse history, and he said, well, he'll be admitted to drug court. He doesn't have a criminal history. This is obviously drug driven. There was no violence. It was daytime. It was for a limited period of time. It was about, I think, a 1 or 2 week window that he committed some burglaries. And he sold what he stole at a pawn shop, and he used it just to buy drugs. This was not self-enrichment burglary. And so I thought, I was panicked, but when he said he would probably get into drug court, an alternative to incarceration, I thought, all right, that sounds, I think I can handle that, certainly. And it's a much longer story, obviously, than this is the ultra abridged version. The lawyer met with the drug court judge, and the judge presented it to the drug court treatment team, and he was accepted. The judge felt it was entirely appropriate because of his history. That's what drug court is for.
Sure.
But and so I learned two things then. First of all, the district attorney's office rejected drug court for my son. And I learned how powerful a district attorney is. And even if this judge wanted my son in, the district attorney has ultimate say of how a defendant is charged and whether or not they will be eligible for an alternative to incarceration.
So it sounds like you found yourself through this experience. I don't want to speak for you, but what I'm hearing is that you found yourself traveling along this journey from, like you said, initially denial, learning about your son's addiction, wanting to help him through it, trying to help him through it, while at the same time becoming a social worker and learning to help others through similar experiences. And then you found yourself suddenly maybe it wasn't sudden, maybe it was more gradual, but dealing with the legal system and dealing with a system that that is intended to help people, but maybe doesn't always lead to the outcomes that a parent certainly would hope for their child.
Yeah, I would say it was as though I'd stepped through this portal of nightmare that would not end. And it was a lot of, I think that the moment of truth kind of really happened the night of his arrest, when he called me from the police station to tell me he had been arrested. And I thought it was because he'd been using drugs. It never occurred to me that he had stolen. I mean, never. He'd never done anything like that. And that night he said to me, first time ever, he said, "You were right." He said, which is ironic because it took me so long to say it to him, but he said, "You're right, I am addicted." He said, "I didn't realize how sick I was, but to have done something like this tells me I need help. I need to go away. I need help." So we knew that he was going for help, and the lawyer arranged it so he could take 3 months, and he went to intensive inpatient for 90 days, while in the back, the legal was brewing. And it's, I think people with mental illness and people with addiction and mitigating circumstances, let's call them, just are not given a fair shake in the system.
Right.
And they end up in prison. And so he did go through 9 months in the end of treatment, intensive inpatient. And during that time, our lawyer kept fighting for drug court. Even though it had been turned down, he kept fighting for it. And then in the end, my son got out, he got a job, he was working while the legal was still in battle. We were still battling. And finally, when the district attorney's office said, "It's over, there's no drug court," we realized he was going to prison. And this was all, my clients had been to prison. It was such a parallel life I was living. I was dealing with clients who had my son's experience, and, I'd fill out their paperwork. They'd been to this one and that one and this one. And I thought, wow, but I never thought my son would end up there. It was just it was just the parallel paths were just so similar, and so and yet it took me so long to see it and to understand it, and it was just too late.
Yeah,
it was too late when I.
And these, listening to you, I'm also realizing, and I think it's not a new realization, but it's really emphasized and amplified by what you're saying, that these are complicated systems, that you're interacting with the treatment system, perhaps the mental health system, the substance abuse system, the law enforcement, and the legal system, and in some cases the political system too. And you've got multiple systems overlapping and interacting with each other, and these are complex processes within our society, and that I think your story really illuminates how difficult it can be for persons who are addicted, persons who have that particular challenge, and then the loved ones who care for them, trying to advocate for them through these multiple systems it's just incredibly difficult.
Well, it is. And the ironic thing is, I went to graduate school to get my MSW to build a career for myself. And what I did simultaneously was arm myself to battle all these systems. And thank goodness, for my social work background, because I knew how to do it. I knew where to call. I wasn't intimidated by hierarchies. I would call people that, probably a regular parent who didn't have the sort of maybe the language and the foundational knowledge would be hesitant to call. But I called anyone I needed to call. I didn't call just like people working there. I would look them up online, executive director. And if that did, funders, I would go everywhere I needed to go. I think if I wasn't a social worker, I wouldn't have done that. And I wouldn't have known how to speak to people in these powerful positions. So it gave me such a valuable education in more ways than one. Mm-hmm. And when my son had to go to rehab after he was arrested, I knew that was complicated for an ordinary person to do. I knew it would be hard for him, especially he'd been using drugs for all these years and he wouldn't know how to maneuver it. So I called the rehab. I called all the time to get my clients in. And now I was calling for my son. They knew me in admissions. I was calling to get my son in there. And you certainly don't get any favors, but they know you. It's easier. Everything, it's just easier getting through all the layers.
It is a complicated process. And even I remember when I was working in the school setting, and there were some kids who needed to be in rehab, even at a young age, 12, 13 years old, they needed to have supports, and trying to navigate the systems. And I had students who are on probation and things like that, navigating the court systems and the drug systems as somebody who wasn't even working directly with substance abuse. It was just one part of my job in the school setting. Mm-hmm. It was extremely complicated. It was a lot of, well, there's no room. I'm sorry. We don't know what to do. We don't know what to do. There's no beds at this place. There's no facility. I'm like, how can you not help a 12-year-old? What do you just wait in until they're 18 years old and then they go into the adult type of systems? So it was a very complicated and frustrating, to say the least. And that's what started getting me interested in more macro practice. I was set on being a social worker in the clinical setting all through grad school. We graduated the same year. I wanted to work in a school setting. And then I ended up in the school setting and I said, whoa, after 4 or 5 years, I was like, I need to take a step back. There's too many kids and families falling through the cracks. There needs to be macro level change. And I think that's some things that you talk about in your book, your manuscript, and you've talked to me off air about the macro level change that you'd like to see.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's so interesting you say that, because I had no doubt I was the clinical track at SUNY. I mean, people would ask me, I'd say, oh, clinical. They'd say micro, macro. Oh, micro, definitely. And I sort of took my macro classes thinking, all right, I have to take these, but I never questioned my choice. And really, I should have been macro, because that's really who I am. The talk about change agents. Mm-hmm. I mean, this is really, I liked working with clients. I really enjoyed it. I had good therapeutic relationships. However, I really am a fighter for change on a larger scale. Right. And that's what I learned through this whole experience. And what you say is absolutely right. No beds, no room. There are no openings in halfway houses. I mean, I just couldn't get my clients in. I couldn't get my son in at various times. Mm-hmm. And so, I had clients calling me. I had one client call me from a detox crying and saying how dirty it was. And she never knew, it was just an awful experience. She wanted to leave. The next day, my son called me from a detox saying, I hate it here. I want to come home. It's dirty. They're not nice to me. And I thought, oh my God. And so ultimately what I ended up doing was, as I mentioned, I did leave social work because I burned out. Yeah. I burned out from being a parent, a social worker who in addiction, who had a child who's addicted, who was treating people who were addicted. Yeah. And the whole criminal justice system, it was too much.
So I guess for those listening, because your story was just very powerful and what can people do if you are a social worker, even if you're not? What can individuals do who want to make change? What's the call to action, I guess, if there is the problems with our systems, which we know there are? What are some ways that individuals can advocate and try to make that macro level impact to change these systems? If you have any ideas or suggestions based on your experience.
Well, one thing I learned is change is slow. It's very, very slow. I mean, we're only just now witnessing some minor tweaks, I'll call them, in the prison system, which is a system that needs major change.
Yeah.
Because as you know, I experienced that as well. But I would say on a very basic level, start by reading the newspaper, whether it's online or in your hands, hard copy. If you don't read the paper, you don't know the issues and you don't know where there are gaps, where people are suffering. You won't, once you understand what's going on, then you can get involved in advocating. And I think that writing letters to the editor can be powerful because a lot of people read your letter. I've written so many letters to the editor that thankfully, when I write one, they always get in. I'm really grateful to the editor for that because I think they get to know your name and they become familiar with your writing. And it's critical that other people know what's going on. So that's one way. You can write op-ed pieces, which is you get many more words in a newspaper. You can highlight a problem. Let's say you want to talk about solitary confinement. Well, a letter to the editor you've limited to, I think it's 150 or 200 words, I can't remember. But an op-ed piece you can expand, you can write a lot more. So that's another way. It's because you are informing other people. And, you know, I don't know, these are tough systems to change.
Yeah.
I think that another thing, if you're working in an agency, agencies need to have some way for people to call to attention deficiencies in the systems. For example, if you're working in an agency, there has to be something in place where you can, if you've experienced something that you think is improper or needs improvement, that you can report it without fear of retribution. Now, I did do that. And at a place later on where I was working, and I was fired because of it. So there can be very serious repercussions. And, you know, at certain times, you know, I talked to other social workers who were very unhappy about various things. And I said, you know, I felt like Sally Field. I was saying, we need a union so we can have a unified voice for this. But no one wanted to complain because they don't want to lose their job. Of course, who wants to lose their job? But in this particular case, it was something that, you know, having a son, I had sort of an inside, in a way, I was able to help my clients by having a son who was experiencing the same thing, because I knew from the inside, I knew what was going on in rehabs. And so I knew when I sent my clients, you know, it was really, they informed each other.
Yeah.
When I worked with my clients, I had the compassion because I had my son dealing with it. I knew what their struggles were very firsthand. So I just went off a bit from your question, Alyssa, but so I think that you need to be proactive if you're in an agency. You need to speak up when you feel something isn't going the way it should be. And find out if there's something in place to protect your job. And if there isn't, there certainly should be.
Yeah, I mean, we should, you know, it seems clear from your story and from certainly others in the media and other folks we've talked to over the years, that whistleblower protections and protections for employees who feel compelled to point out practices that are inappropriate or that, are doing more harm than they are good, that there should be, a protective, safe avenue for folks to, to bring that to light and to not fear for their jobs when they're in fact trying to do the right thing and trying to improve the quality of services.
These are people's lives.
Yeah.
This is not, you're not complaining about, it's too hot, we need air conditioning. That's important too, but we're talking about more basic things like services and how clients are treated and what's lacking and mistreatment or any kind of abuse. We are, as social workers, we're bound to report that. So, but what do you do I was fired. So what do you do if you don't want to be fired? So it's a problem.
Well, one of the things that's so interesting, and I should remind listeners, if you just tuned in, you're listening to the Social Workers on WCDB Albany, and we've got live guest with us today, Lynn Rothenberg, who has written a manuscript, a book-length manuscript, which hopefully will be published in the near future as a book. And so as our special guest today, we've been talking about Lynn's experiences as a parent of someone who is addicted, certainly was addicted, and then talking about your own experiences through the legal system, advocating for your son, and through various systems. But one of the things that I heard that I think I hear as a through line between all of your experiences, and this resonates with what Alyssa and I talk about a lot on the show, is the concept of voice and finding one's voice, whether that's as a social worker or in whatever profession, or just as a civilian out there in society, that it's important for people to find a voice. And that voice, sometimes you need to be an advocate, sometimes you need to be a whistleblower, sometimes you need to write letters to the editor, and sometimes you need to write a book, and sometimes, even coming on a podcast or a radio show like this, that there is a through line there about finding one's voice and using that voice to advocate for social change and for change in society. And I hear you finding that voice, and that's really wonderful to hear.
Yeah, I think that that's really important, what you're pointing out. And in fact, I normally am pretty private, and I know that sounds funny because here I am on the radio and I've written a book. But as I was writing the book, I realized that this is a story that could help others, that could inform other parents maybe who are going through a similar thing. Maybe it could be added to the many voices that are trying to change systems. And I started thinking, who am I? Then I was going to write it with a pen name. And I thought, why am I doing this? Why? People need to know what is happening out there. This is not something that should be hidden. In the beginning, I hid that he was addicted, that my son was addicted. And at some point I thought, that's wrong. People need to know this happens to everyone. This is out there. This is before the so-called opioid epidemic, that my son was using heroin. And also the prison system, that was I didn't tell anyone. It was just a difficult topic. It was a real conversation. Well, it was a starter and a killer, it was a tough thing to bring up at a dinner party. But then I thought, people need to know what's going on. My son's voice is in the book too, because I've interspersed his voice in it. We did tapings and I transcribed them. So there are chapters of just his voice of what's going on in there. That's valuable. If we ever hope to bring change, we have to know what's really going on.
And so, Lynn, I want to ask you, because you just brought this full circle back to his experience. We've been talking about your experience primarily, but his voice is important too. And can you share, or, without wanting to pry here too much, can you share a little bit about how he's doing now and sort of where that journey has led him?
Yes, I'd be happy to. So he was released in 2016. He went through 3 years of parole, and he is now married. And he has a daughter who will turn 3 next month. His wife is expecting another baby next month. And oddly enough, on the same day as the first child's birthday. They both have the same birthday, if it's on time. And he has developed he's just took the licensing exam to be a private adjuster, and he's forming an LLC, and he's doing very well.
Well, that's, it's so heartening to hear that this is a story with with a positive ending. And, that again, in that spirit of voice, that you found a voice to use your experiences and his experiences to share with others and to kind of work for, a larger purpose, if you will.
Well, it is. It's not just a personal story. I see it more as a metaphor, really, of what's happening in society. And I'm grateful to my son. I just have to throw this in here because he's letting me tell his story. I mean, and use his name and my name. Yeah. And he said, if it helps people, he said, go for it, Mom. So I went for it.
And Lynn, I know your book isn't out yet, but if somebody does want to contact you, they heard your story today, they want to advocate more, they want maybe some advice or just to talk for some more information. I know you don't have a website or anything yet, but is there a good way for individuals to contact you, maybe via email? And can you let us know?
Yes, I am open. Certainly anyone can contact me. My email is my name, Lynn Rothenberg, @gmail.com, LYNNROTHENBERG @gmail.com. That's probably the best way to reach me, and I certainly will respond. If they have comments or questions, or if someone, which I hope isn't the case, but is going through what I went through at the moment, I'm happy to offer any advice, assistance, help that I can.
Well, thank you for that. And, I also want to really commend you on your bravery and your son's bravery to get through this experience, this set of experiences that, all of us, and both Alyssa and I are parents too. And everybody's sort of, I think, who is a parent, and maybe even folks who aren't, worry about this possibility of addiction but maybe don't have firsthand experience with it. And so sharing your story is a brave act. And I think, and your son's, survivorship to make it through this, and to not only make it through, but to actually succeed, is just it's a really great way to know that it's possible, and that it isn't, it doesn't always have a sad ending.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes.
So Lynn, I want to thank you for coming on and sharing this story. Like I said, it's very informative, and getting your voice out there to the larger public so other people can know that they're not alone if they are going through something similar. It's very powerful. So I do want to thank you as well for coming on today and sharing that.
Thank you. It was my pleasure.
And we're just going to be positive thinkers here and just say that we look forward to reading the book once it's published.
Thank you.
Because that's I think the exciting part of it is that when you get this published, and I say when, not if, that it'll be great to have an audience of folks who can, find out about the book, discover it, read it, and benefit from its knowledge and wisdom.
Yes. Thank you. Yep.
So we'll invite you back once it's published, and you can actually promote it a little bit.
I'd love to. Okay.
So you've been listening to The Social Workers here on WCDB Albany. As always, I'm Eric Hardiman here with Alyssa Lotmore, and we've had special guest Lynn Rothenberg with us. Lynn is an alumnus of the School of Social Welfare here at the University at Albany from 2008 with her MSW degree, and has just written a book-length manuscript about her experiences as a parent of an addicted child who has gone through the legal system, the prison system, the rehab system, and sort of the intersection of all those systems. And so we thank you for listening to The Social Workers. Alyssa, do you want to share any last thoughts and maybe information for folks?
No, we will be back with more episodes this academic year. You can always find us on the Social Workers Radio Talk Show on social media, where our handle is at Social Workers FM. Always listen to us as well on WCDB Thursday mornings from 10 to noon.
Thanks for listening to the Social Workers on WCDB Albany.